Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast, the webinar. Gary Schoeniger here. Welcome to the Workplace Transformation with an Entrepreneurial Mindset webinar. Boy, I really stumbled that one right out of the gate. So Happy New Year to everybody. Thanks for joining me and Tom today for this webinar. Before we get started, I want to just do a couple of housekeeping things. There is, in the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat function. If I'd like you all to just click on the chat function, it'll open a chat window on the side of your screen. If you all could just sort of chime in, say hello, what your name is, where you're from, just kind of let's get the conversation started here so we kind of have a feel about who's here. I've looked at some of the lists. We've got a lot of people. Glendale City Court, welcome. Wow, this is it. Awesome. Raleigh, some people from Durham, from LaSalle. Steve, hey Steve, welcome. Yeah, thank you. It always freaks me out. People just, Kyla Norris from Center of Creative Economy, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Calgary, awesome, welcome. A couple of the Icehouse entrepreneurs are Canadians. So Steve from Charleston. Lancaster, California, Paul from Taos, New Mexico. Wow, awesome. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, PA, public education. Hey, Timothy, maybe we connected a couple of weeks ago at the SAS conference where I keynoted in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Maybe that's where we connected. Glad you guys are all here. Glad to see so many folks here. I see there's a couple of familiar faces on here. We've got a pretty broad audience. There's a lot of folks here from the corporate side. There are a lot of educators here, both K-12 and university and higher ed. And we also have some consultants on here as well. So, hey, Tricia, glad you're here. That's a familiar face right here. So we also have some people who are already certified in the Icehouse Entrepreneurship program. I got a Q&A. Okay, Earl is from Oceanside, California. Welcome, Earl. Let me just get started now. So I'm going to jump in with some slides. I got to share my screen here before I do that. All right. Share my screen. Make sure everybody can. All right, there we go. Can you guys all see my screen here? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I can't see the chat function while I'm. Let me see if I can do this. Can I get the chat function while I'm sharing? Yes, I can. Okay, perfect. There it is. I can just put that in my upper right-hand corner. I'm going to move Tom's smiling face over to the side. Okay, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about transforming the workplace with an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's, before we jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about who we are. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. That's ELI. We are a global organization dedicated to entrepreneurial mindset education programs. We also provide keynotes, workshops, facilitator training, and professional development programs for individuals, for organizations, and academic institutions worldwide. That's a little bit about what we do. Today, I'm joined by Tom Darling. He is a longtime Icehouse facilitator. He's one of our most successful top shelf facilitators of the Icehouse Entrepreneurship Program. Tom's been teaching this program now, I think, about 5 years, almost since its inception. And Tom's going to talk a little bit about how he's transforming this work culture in city government with the Icehouse Entrepreneurial Mindset program. But he has also taught the course in high schools and at the college and university level in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. So there's 4 key concepts that we want to talk about today. And the first one is, I'm going to talk a little bit about the underlying logic that drives entrepreneurial behavior. I'm also going to talk about the ways in which entrepreneurs transform problems into opportunities. Tom will then talk about how entrepreneurs or entrepreneurials, how they find and solve problems for their clients, for their stakeholders, and for their coworkers. Tom will also talk about how entrepreneurial mindset education can enable a culture shift in the workplace. So I'm going to hit these first 2 points, and then Tom will hit the second. So just as a jumping off point, where we're coming from is that the world has changed in ways that now require everyone to think like an entrepreneur. The days of just do exactly as you're told, we want you to do exactly what you're told, like that's just not going to cut it anymore. And the part of the challenge that we're seeing is that our systems of education are not keeping pace with the rate of accelerated change, the dynamism in the workplace, in the world, that our systems of education are not preparing students to keep pace with this rapid change. And this is one data point here from now the former senior vice president of people operations, that's HR in Google speak, in a New York Times article interview saying that GPAs and test scores are worthless as a criteria for hiring at Google. We're seeing more and more people coming out with this saying that the academic achievement is further and further divorced from the attitudes and skills that are required to survive and succeed and thrive in the workplace. I spoke at a conference with Tony Wagner a few weeks ago in Hershey, Pennsylvania. One of the things he said that struck me was that the skills required for innovation are the skills that are discouraged in school. That it's just what we're taught in school is at odds with the innovative skills that are required in the workplace. Stumbling over my words today for some reason. But as part of this, this conversation, this is Gallup's data on student engagement. And what we're seeing is that the longer students stay in school, the less engaged they become. And this is from a 2016 report from Gallup on student engagement. And one of the questions they put forth is, shouldn't that go in the other direction? Shouldn't the engagement go up the longer students are in school? What we see is that by the time a student reaches high school, only about 1 in 3 students are engaged in learning, which ironically is very close to workforce engagement. So here goes Gallup's data on workforce engagement. 13% are actively disengaged, which generally means hostile to the workplace and working against the organization's goals. 53% are just not engaged. These are people that Gallup describes as just doing the minimal to get by. These are, what I would say, those are who are phoning it in. And ironically, about the same amount of high school students that are engaged is where the workforce engagement lands as well. That only about 1 in 3 workers are actively engaged in their work. Now, what we find is that entrepreneurials are hyper engaged. And I'm using the word entrepreneurial to move us beyond the conversation of people who are just owning a business. So this is sort of a new term that I've coined, like entrepreneurials are like millennials, only they're not beholden to a specific generation. What they have in common is a way of thinking. So, but the question is, why are entrepreneurials so engaged, so resourceful, so creative? They're such critical thinkers, self-directed learners. They're resourceful, they're resilient, they're reliable. Why is that? Why do some people behave this way when others don't? I mean, that's really the big question that I've been trying to deconstruct now for more than 20 years. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And one of the conclusions that I've come to after about 25 years of research in this domain is that our ability to embrace entrepreneurship is limited by its definition. And when we think of it only in its traditional sense as a discipline for people who want to start a business, we block off most people from entrepreneurial thinking. We sort of create this bounded rationality that limits its application. And we all know colleges and universities have entrepreneurship programs, and they attempt to emulate sort of the Silicon Valley venture-backed idea. We see high schools, they have like business programs. And one of the things that we've discovered in our research is that was really, really eye-opening is that what we found is that the attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to discover an opportunity are distinct from the attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to exploit an opportunity. And that's a really important distinction. Another way of saying that is that entrepreneurial skills are different from managerial skills. And once we kind of understand that, it opens up a new way of thinking about entrepreneurship to us. So this journey got very interesting for me in about 2007. I was hired by the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute in San Jose, California, to do some research on the entrepreneurship education ecosystem in the United States, to do a gap analysis and to figure out how to backfill some of the gaps and the shortfalls of entrepreneurship education. And that was really an instrumental, a monumental point, a pivotal point. That's where we really discovered by interviewing, what we learned from the Cisco research is that the way entrepreneurship is thought of, the way that it's characterized in classrooms and small business development centers is largely divorced from the boots on the ground reality of what a typical entrepreneurial person is actually doing, right? So another way of saying this is that if you look at a bell curve of all the entrepreneurial activity in the United States, let's just say, and I know there are folks on this call from overseas, from beyond the United States, but just from a US-centric perspective for a moment, if you look at all the entrepreneurial activity on a bell curve, what we're promoting in classrooms is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction way out on the edge of the curve. And what we did at Cisco was look at the bulk of the everyday entrepreneurs, people who don't have access to power and privilege. They're not necessarily at Stanford with MBAs. They don't have big ideas that are going to change the world or warrant millions of in venture capital. And that really proved to be an eye-opening experience when we started to look beneath the surface of what the typical entrepreneur who doesn't have resource access, who isn't particularly creative or charismatic, or has no particular advantage other than the logic that underlies their behavior. So part of what we discovered through this is when you look at what they're doing, it's really about discovering an opportunity. They're searching for this intersection between their own interests and abilities and the needs of other people. And so a simple definition of entrepreneurship is it's a discovery process. It's an opportunity discovery process. This simple definition invites everyone in. What we also uncovered in our research is that not everyone wants to start a business, nor should they. But most human beings want to be engaged in work that matters. Most human beings want to have some autonomy over their day-to-day lives. Most humans want to see their work impact other people. They also want to see their work leading towards a more, a pathway to a more prosperous, a more meaningful life. They want to be engaged in meaningful work. So This definition of entrepreneurship as an opportunity discovery process really sort of breaks open and sort of cracks the code, sort of dispels some of the myth and the mystery, and invites everyone into the conversation. So what we've also discovered through hundreds and hundreds of interviews, what I would say call ethnographic interviews with these everyday entrepreneurs, what we began to recognize is the attitudes and skills that enable them to recognize opportunity. I'll call these opportunity discovery skills. It starts with empathy, and this always startles people, right? This is not something you would equate with a business discipline, but it starts with the recognition that it's, I got to figure out how to solve problems for other people. And that means I need to figure out what other people's problems are. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It requires observation and inquiry. Again, these two kind of go hand in hand. Requires the ability to design and conduct experiments, right? To experiment and adapt. It's an iterative experimental process. It requires creativity and critical thinking. Requires effective communication, teamwork, collaboration, effective problem solving, resourcefulness and agility, self-directed learning and self-regulation, the ability to sort of the internal locus of control to regulate my own behavior, my own schedule, my own time, my emotions, and so forth. So we talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. I wanted to just throw up a quick definition of what we mean when we say mindset. It's a word a lot of people are using today. I want to just put some parameters around this and define it as the underlying beliefs and tacit assumptions that drive our behavior. What I mean by underlying is it's most of the mindset functions beneath our conscious awareness. These are deeply held, mostly unconscious or taken for granted beliefs and assumptions that influence our behavior largely without our awareness. And that's really an important piece of the puzzle here. From our interviews, from the ethnographic interviews we've done with now it's probably close to 500 entrepreneurs, there seems to be this core underlying assumption, mostly tacit, that leads to all this other entrepreneurial activity. And that it's a deeply held, mostly unconscious belief or assumption that it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to others. And the more useful I am, the better off I'm going to be. And it's a really simple assumption. And keep in mind, like, entrepreneurs don't know what they know. They won't say this like outright, but this is sort of the underlying logic embedded in the mindset that drives the behavior, right? So that's really a key point here. If you want to understand how entrepreneurs recognize opportunity, they're operating from a different perspective. It's a deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption that drives the behavior. Now, on the surface, entrepreneurs appear to be endowed with some scientifically unfathomable traits, the hereditary traits. But when you dig beneath the surface, you'll recognize that they're simply operating from a different logic model. It has nothing to do with hereditary traits. I've looked at the research. I've looked at a meta-analysis in the psychological research for decades. Researchers have been trying to connect entrepreneurial activity to hereditary traits, and the correlation is essentially meaningless. So this is really the key slide here in my view. It's this underlying assumption that drives the behavior. It's up to me to make myself responsible to others. So we've identified these 5 areas that we see in experienced entrepreneurs that result from this core assumption that it's my responsibility to make myself useful to others. We tend to see a high degree of self-efficacy, which is considered domain-specific confidence, right? You can have high self-efficacy as a soccer coach and very low self-efficacy as a computer programmer. I mean, it's a domain-specific confidence is the simple term there. They tend to have an internal locus of control, which is a deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption that I'm the captain of my own ship. My outcomes are my responsibility. It's up to me to make things happen. As compared to someone with an external locus of control who has a deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption that fate or luck or circumstances or powerful others are controlling my destiny, right? And again, these things don't come to our conscious awareness. We're not walking around saying, hi, my name's Gary, I have an external locus of control. You can recognize people with an external locus of control because what shows up on the surface is complaining, like a negative viewpoint, pessimism, this always happens to me. A lot of complaining is sort of a surface manifestation of an external locus of control. We also see in entrepreneurials, they tend to be intrinsically motivated. They're not motivated solely by dollars or letter grades or carrots and sticks. They're motivated by the work they're doing, by the intrinsic satisfaction that the work brings to them. We know from the literature, people who are intrinsically motivated outperform those who are extrinsically motivated by dollars, letter grades, gold stars, whatever, separable rewards. We tend to see a high degree of resiliency in experienced entrepreneurs. And resiliency stems from what psychologists refer to as an explanatory style, meaning when we find ourselves in adverse circumstances, do we have an optimistic explanatory style or a pessimistic explanatory style? So, hi, Steve. Steve Melnick here. Great to have you on the call. An optimistic explanatory style, when we get into a jackpot, we're telling ourselves this problem is fixable, it's local, it's temporary. Those who have a pessimistic explanatory style tend to tell themselves this is global, this is permanent, there's nothing I can do about it, it's not fixable. Again, these are deeply held, like you probably didn't know you had an explanatory style. I would like to call this like this is the story you tell yourself when you encounter a problem. It makes an enormous difference on your ability to persevere in the face of challenge and setback. Lastly, what we tend to see in experienced entrepreneurs is a growth mindset, a belief that I'm able to develop my talent, my skills, and my abilities. They're not fixed, that I can grow my talent and abilities. It's from the work of Carol Dweck and the growth mindset. Now, the key point here is that these are mostly the effects of being innovative and entrepreneurial. They're not the cause. And so often we make what psychologists call a fundamental attribution error. You see this in social media all the time. You interview a very successful entrepreneur, and then someone writes an article about here's the 5 things you need to be a successful entrepreneur. You need to have high self-efficacy, internal locus control, intrinsic motivation, highly resilient, and growth mindset. Well, no, you don't. Those things happen as the result of pursuing a compelling goal. They occur over time. They're not the cause, they're the effect. And what we fail to realize is that very often when the entrepreneur started, they had very little, if any, of those abilities or traits. It's like someone once said, like, it's not about reaching the goal, it's more about what happens to us in the pursuit of the goal. So, okay, enough about that. I'm going to tell you about the Icehouse Entrepreneurship Program. It came about as the result of our interviews. I ran into an unlikely entrepreneur in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Clifton Talbert, my co-author in the book. He was, among others of his many accomplishments, he was one of the founders of the Stairmaster exercise company. when I asked him how he learned how to think like an entrepreneur, he explained to me that he was born in the Mississippi Delta in a very poor cotton community. He was born to a teenage mother. He didn't know a father. He was relegated to the cotton fields, as was, as he said to me, this was the expected way of life for people that looked like me. At the age of 13, he had a chance to work in the local Icehouse with his Uncle Cleve Mormon. And Uncle Cleve had a 4th or a 5th grade education. They weren't allowed in the bank, but he had money in the bank. He was just different from everyone else in his community. And so we sort of used this story as the inspiration for what became the Icehouse Entrepreneurship programs. It was funded initially by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. It's gone all over the world. It's being used very effectively in middle and high schools and community colleges, 4-year universities, economic development organizations, veteran initiatives, small business programs, reentry programs, workforce development nonprofit. It's taken off in ways I could have never, ever imagined. One of those ways, now I want to turn this over to Tom. I met Tom about 5 years ago when he got trained initially when he was teaching at Central New Mexico Community College. But a crazy thing happened. We were contacted by the mayor's office in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to train city government workers how to think like entrepreneurs. So for all the skeptics on the call, right, I probably thought like you did, a city government worker, that's the polar opposite of an entrepreneur. and so they hired Tom initially to put 100 people in the Albuquerque city government through the program. Tom was the facilitator. The outcomes that he got were so impressive that the city is now committed to all 6,000 employees going through the course. I think, Tom, you said you got about 600 so far. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to now turn this over to Tom. He's going to tell you how he deployed the program at Public Service University in the city of Albuquerque. You can also ask him questions about how he's also taught it for high school students through the community college and to adults in an academic setting. So, Tom, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to stop sharing and turn this screen over to you.
Okay.
And it's all yours.
All right, let me just share my screen here and then we'll get started. Can everybody see that?
Yep, I can see
Awesome.
it.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Gary, and it's great to have everybody on here. Let me get my, I don't have my chat box up, but I'll let you help me field questions, Gary.
Okay, that's fine, Tom. I got the chat box on here.
So I'm the division manager for Public Service University here at the city of Albuquerque, and I've been here since 2016, and I'll talk in a minute about, elaborate a little bit of what Gary said. And just a little bit of background. I'm an entrepreneur. I ran a construction company and had a mortgage company for a while, and have been in training and education for the last 23 years, and entrepreneurial consultant, business owner. And yes, I work for the city of Albuquerque now, and I still teach part-time for the college. That's what entrepreneurs do. We stay really, really active. So just to give you some little background about the story about how this came to the city of Albuquerque, as Gary said before, in 2014, I went to the Kauffman Foundation, signed up for Eli's facilitator training to become a licensed facilitator to train in the Entrepreneurial Mindset program. And so after we got trained as a facilitator, came back to Central New Mexico Community College, and we started offering the course to our students in the business administration program. I was the chair of the program at the time, teaching intro to entrepreneurship. Also did a group of high school students that we took through a dual credit option. They were getting college credit for participating in our intro to entrepreneurship class, which was great. And then, as Gary said, there was this idea for this pilot program we were in the process of developing our innovation district downtown, wanting to become one of the most entrepreneurial cities in the country. And so there was a really good kind of meld of time and place and opportunity to do this pilot program. So in 2015, through our workforce development arm of the college, I taught about 5 or 6 courses and took 100 city employees through this. And we were blown away by the reaction we've got. We had incredible ideas, and people were getting excited and starting to kind of see what possibilities there were by innovatively solving problems within their workforce. Because an employee that has value in their work is an engaged employee. So at the end of 2015, we did a one-day overview session for the mayor's staff and the administration to kind of get an idea of what this would look like. And then opportunity presented itself, and I got hired to actually run our public service university, which is the division of our human resources department here, which provides all employee training to our 6,000 employees here at the city of Albuquerque, with the caveat that obviously the entrepreneurial mindset would be integrated into all of our leadership development, and we would teach it to everybody here at the city. So as Gary mentioned, the problem with the workforce, as Gallup, organization says, we've got this, 13% disengaged actively, 53%, coming to work and phoning it in, with 34% engaged. It's a little worse in public service. Those numbers are a little bit different. And we find, and everybody knows when you say, hey, when you think of a city worker, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And anytime we ask that question out in the public, usually the answer is watching 5 guys stand around one guy doing a bunch of work. And a lot of people have this association or this assumption that government employees are lazy. Now, I will say this. When I used to teach at the college, we talked about, people that were disengaged in the workplace, and we used to use government as that example. I will say, since I've come to work here, I have found out that there are wonderful people that we have employed in city government. And it's interesting, where does the disengagement happen? And a lot of times we're finding that the very front lines, our employees are engaged, but they're being held back by some of the middle management who sometimes are more disengaged. And because government is something that your mixed meal doesn't necessarily depend on, it's easy just to come to work and put out 30% of your efforts, which is a challenge. So what we're doing is we're teaching organizational leaders to engage their employees in their work by empowering them to take responsibility for creating innovative change and not waiting for permission to solve problems. So my vision statement here at Public Service University is to transform the corporate culture of the city of Albuquerque workforce by empowering employees to be fully engaged in their work. And what we have found with this program, because when I started teaching, and I was teaching it to entrepreneurs in the community through our business accelerator at the college, I was teaching intro to entrepreneurship. And a lot of people think, well, when you teach entrepreneurship, you're basically going to run all your employees off to go start businesses. It could not be further from the truth. Once we started teaching this to employees, workforce employees, people employed in the workforce, not ever intending to be an entrepreneur, we started finding that employees, when they start to think like an entrepreneur and they start to identify problems, validate that those are real problems, come up with solutions that they can test and experiment with in the real world, and then learn and validate whether those solutions really do provide some type of meaningful innovation or change to the organization, that then we have the opportunity for change. And when an employee is given the freedom to be able to do that, they are excited to come to work. They're excited to get there early. They're excited to go home late. That what they do during the day has value and it matters. And we all know, if you've ever been involved in any organizational development, money as a motivating factor is usually 4th or 5th on the list, unless the first 3, which is, the value of the work. Am I valued by my boss? Do I like the people that I work with? And do I feel like I'm making a contribution to the organization? If those are not there, money becomes the only thing that matters. And in government or in a nonprofit or in a state-funded school, money is something we can negotiate. And so keeping our employees motivated completely changes, and we've got to change the mindset of the workplace. So how do we do this? Well, as Gary said, they developed this curriculum, and the curriculum is developed over 8 lessons. And so we do it a number of different ways. And obviously one of the things I expressed to you already is we did a 1-day overview for the leadership and the administration here at the city so that they could see the main points of each one of the lessons and understand the outcomes and how they would impact their employees. We have a 2-day version, and I'll explain why in 2 days, why in 4 days or 8 weeks. A 2-day version we do for supervisors to help supervisors understand how to think like an entrepreneur, but how to empower their employees to allow their employees to be able to identify and solve problems. And then we do 4 full days. We do them on Fridays, 4 Fridays in a row, the full course for all frontline employees. And we also have an online synchronous version that we do for 2 hours a week online for 8 weeks. And then the employees, and this is for folks that aren't necessarily here, this is to give a larger, broader reach for folks out there that want to be able to be involved in one of these classes. Now we have 8 lessons, and each lesson goes through, starts with the power to choose, retraining people how to realize that they have the power to choose their viewpoint, their locus of control, how they're going to approach the problems they face every day. The second is problems or opportunities, or opportunity discovery. We help employees realize that the problems they have in their departments and in their organization are opportunities, not just roadblocks. Then we talk about ideas into action. How do we take those problems and come up with ideas that we can validate and put them into action? We also talk about knowledge, the power of knowledge, and how do we take our knowledge and apply it to those things. We also do a financial literacy piece for all employees where we talk about creating wealth and what does it mean to have a investing mindset versus a spending mindset, which is really important in organizations with limited budgets. And then we talk about branding and reliability and how to develop a personal brand, but also what does it mean to represent the brand of the organization that we work in. And then we talk about building a success network. How do we develop relationships with people within the organization that are intentional, not accidental, but intentional relationships for mentoring and for support and for encouragement and accountability. And then we talk about resilience and not giving up. And how do we, in an organization where we're trying to solve problems, how do we work around barriers? How do we persist in getting through there? So those are the 8 lessons that we teach everybody in the course. What they do while they're in the course, though, is they work in groups. And in each of these groups, they work on this activity called the Opportunity Discovery Canvas. It's a 9-box business canvas that we use to go through and identify a problem, validate the problem with real people, test an idea, validate that idea, and then how do we, and then come with steps about how to implement that idea on a small scale. And with all of our employees here at the city, everyone has to work on a project that's specifically related to their department or to their area or another employee's department when they work together in teams. And none of the solutions they come up with can use new money. It has to use existing resources and the constraints that we have at the organization and test with our existing structure, which really helps, this process of getting okay and becoming okay with realizing that we have problems. So our outcomes, as Gary said, we've trained 600 employees, and we've done that with a standalone class. We've done it through a couple of the other options. We've also embedded this training course in our supervisory training and in our pre-management training that we do for employees that we're moving into succession. We have about 250 projects that are ongoing. And one thing that's interesting about this is we don't limit our employees to what project they can focus on. A lot of times people say, oh, well, gosh, what are you doing about homelessness in the city? Or what are you going to do about the budget? Or what are you going to do about police, and crime? Those are great problems. But most of the time, the problems that exist in our organizations are small problems, and they're right here. And it could be, the efficiency of the paper. It could be a simple issue with our hiring process, whatever that is. So we don't have a limit on this size. We actually encourage our employees to grab low-hanging fruit in their department and identify those problems that we can test a solution for as soon as possible. Because what we've learned is if we have 50 people working on 50 small problems, some of these larger problems that kind of, reign up here at the higher level, some of those issues start to disappear as all these problems at the bottom level go away. And what we're doing now is we're working with our new Office of Innovation, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, for being able to scale these projects and support our employees through implementation organization-wide. And why are we on the call? Well, we want to engage other organizations to be able to have the same success and to do the same thing. Clearly we're working in an area right now where employee engagement is really difficult. And with the stats that we saw from Gallup, how do we motivate an employee? You can't do it with money. You can't do it with a vacation. It's got to be something that's internally motivated to start with inside that employee. And when the value and helping them to understand that they have the power to choose, and then giving them the freedom to be able to solve problems, it works. It's crazy. Who would have ever guessed that helping a bunch of employees in any organization think like entrepreneurs do out there who have to go find resources, who have to find a way to eat, would revolutionize our corporate culture here. It's crazy, but it's amazing. So there's two people we want to introduce you to today. Two guests that we have that I've asked to be here from the city of Albuquerque, who we're going to talk a little bit. We wanted to let you guys hear from some real people that have gone through the class and are actually working and actually involved here. The first is Matthew Whalen. He is the director of our City of Albuquerque Solid Waste Department. And our second guest is Haley Kadish, is it Kadish?
Kadish.
Kadish. Gosh, I always mess that up. I'm sorry, Haley. She's our new innovation officer. You've been here, 3 months now, 4 months?
I think it's been 6.
Oh, has it been 6 already?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. So, and so what we want to do is we want to ask them some questions and let you hear from them and give you the opportunity to ask them some questions as well to talk about on the ground, real life on the ground, how is a program like this deployed in an organization with a workforce actually processing through. So without further ado, I want to ask each of you, Matt and Haley, introduce yourself. And I kind of gave an explanation of your position, but just talk about how long you've been here, and then tell us about your experience when you signed up and when you signed up for the Entrepreneurial Mindset course, and what was your experience in that course when you took it?
Let Haley go first.
Okay. Well, okay. Thanks, Tom. So as Tom had mentioned, that I've been here for, I think it's been about 6 months. I started in June, so a little over 6 months. And I'm the Performance and Innovation Officer for the city, and it's a brand new role, and I am the office of one. So I took, so I was actually in consulting before joining the city. And I remember, one of my big takeaways as a consultant was that the answers were usually already existing in the organization, and people knew what was wrong and they knew what should be done. There just wasn't that ability to kind of elevate the solutions from the front line, often in many organizations. And so I sort of viewed my role as a consultant was to elevate those solutions. I wasn't coming up with the ideas. I was just pulling them out of the organization, if that makes sense. So then I was excited when I joined the city to hear that we had this program already in place that was meant to kind of help do that in the organization and empower employees to solve the problems that they and their customers experience on a daily basis. And so I took the course more just to kind of hear. I wanted exposure to the content, and I wanted to just kind of hear what employees going through the course were hearing. I honestly didn't have high expectations for learning anything myself, but I did come away from it very inspired and had a lot of learning takeaways. Honestly, from the course, I took it in November, so it's just been a couple months. But the other upside was that my team chose to work on my project, so they sort of started doing my work for me, which was beneficial. We were tackling some issues with the hiring process in the city and it taking too long, so they really helped me there get feedback from people in their divisions, and it was actually really beneficial for me. in like that very tangible way, in addition to the inspiration. One thing that it has been impacting me, and I'm kind of carrying things through, it was recent, but one of the downsides, I think, of having a role like an innovation officer is that there's sort of this expectation that only one person is going to do innovation. Like, we have this innovation officer, like, check, we're innovative. That's kind of a lot of pressure for one person, but it also is not the way that innovation kind of naturally should and does work in an organization. It really should be part of everyone's role. And so I've been starting to think kind of how do we create this culture of innovation, and how can I leverage this role to foster the innovation that's already happening in the organization? And that's kind of the conversation that Tom and I have been having lately. And that's been the way that I want to sort of leverage the graduates coming out of the class. Kind of thinking like, my first few projects, I've realized I can innovate a process, I can innovate maybe one department, but then I become the bottleneck. And we have, Tom, how many did you say you've trained? Like 500 people in the city already?
Yeah, almost 600. Yeah.
Yeah. So hey, we have all of these innovators already out there. So Tom and I's conversation has been sort of, how do we leverage this position and this office to kind of elevate those solutions? And I think it's great that the course has the students and participants focus on a change that they can make. And it's usually, something that doesn't require funding, something they can pilot and test out. And so some of the ways I think that maybe my position could be beneficial is to elevate those solutions that maybe are scalable. So if one division, a participant tests something and it works, and hey, maybe we can share that with all of the other 26 departments and help them benefit from that innovation. So scalable solutions and kind of doing that. And then also, if there are big barriers that folks run into, like I can imagine, hitting a wall with IT or budget or something like that, that maybe then that's when I could get involved and try to kind of help overcome some of those barriers. And then funding. I think it makes sense that we start with these smaller solutions, but some of the bigger problems might require more work or maybe dedicated staff time, that kind of thing. And so that's kind of an area where Tom and I have been talking about getting the ideas from these people in the organization and then really helping them to implement it. I'm very cautious about trying to tell people that they can make big change and sending them out and then just having them smack into a wall, because I think that could be more detrimental than ever telling them that they could innovate in the first place. So I'm really cautious. I want to make sure that if we tell employees that they're empowered, that then they are actually empowered. And so that's also been sort of part of Tom and I's conversation, that we're cautious there. The other thing is, how do we measure the impact of some of these things? I mean, it might be something small, like I know Tom told stories about figuring out how to not print documents, figuring out how to, I think it was in planning, right? And a student had come up with a way of making a process electronic, and the customers loved it. They don't want to spend all this money printing documents and bringing it in person. And so how do we quantify some of the savings and kind of the return on investment of some of our investments in our innovation? So that was sort of my experience with the course. I feel like I'm still really inspired and excited about it, and I hope we can kind of continue to engage all of those graduates in innovation with the city.
Great.
Yeah, Haley, it's just so exciting for me to hear as the creator of the course, but I love what you're saying and the way you're going about this, because, people think that, Mark Zuckerberg's walking down the street one day and an idea comes like out of the sky, like a lightning bolt. And what they don't realize is that, good ideas are the results of lots of bad ideas. Right. And so I think you're right on to encourage people to just start being innovative and entrepreneurial in your little corner of the world in the smallest, simplest little ways, and develop that ability, develop those muscles. And it's just something that's got to be encouraged and developed. And I love what the way you and Tom are saying, some of these ideas are starting to have merit and are worth bringing forward. And I just think that's really the right way to go about it. And to be mindful of, not encouraging people like, let's go out and solve the homelessness problem, because you're spot on. It's actually going to become detrimental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, demotivating.
Set the bar too high, then there's a failure, and it's sort of self-reinforcing a failure mentality.
That's actually probably another way a role like this could maybe provide a little bit of cover, because I think a lot of organizations want to be innovative, but we don't really like failure either. But if failure is just a part of innovation, I mean, really giving people that safe space in which to fail might actually be another way that we could support the organization.
Right. And Icehouse teaches like micro experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the failures are very contained. They're not, like, oh, we just blew $100,000 budget or something like that. It's
that's true.
Encouraging people to start really small and micro experiment. And that's how you mitigate the risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The perception that entrepreneurs are like the gamblers, right? The bold risk takers that are willing to bet it all. That's not really the way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Matt, let's hear from you. So same question, describe your experience with the Icehouse class, and Haley actually went into the third. How has that experience impacted your role now today? So go for it.
My role here at the city is I'm the director of solid waste for the city of Albuquerque, and I've been with the city over probably about 8.5 years now. So I've been here for a little while. And a brief history, I started in public accounting. I got my degree in accounting and a second degree just in finance. But I was a part of that first 100 people that took the class when Tom taught it, which was through CNM. And when I was told to take the class at the time, I was just a fiscal manager. And, I was told, you want to take this class? And I read they kind of said, I'm like, sure, I'll take it. I'm always up for trying new things. And really taking that class, it did one thing, it really expanded my view of not only my job and what I was doing at the time, because I came from public accounting. So I knew the words of what city employees were. I actually audited the city of Albuquerque. I knew how city employees worked. But after spending so many years in public accounting, I was pretty burnt out. And so I came to the city to just as a general accountant, just to work and kind of reevaluate things. And as I was working here, I just started saying, I can make this a career and I can retire from this, and I was just a staff accountant at the time, but then I was promoted to a fiscal manager. And that's when I took the class. And it really had me reevaluate my goals and aspirations as for what I was going to do. And the experience was it was big, because it just made me start to look at things from a completely different standpoint. As far as I'm not just looking at numbers, I'm looking at ways to change things. A lot of people just look at the work that's right in front of them, but it started having me look, well, how is this going to affect something else down the road? How will this affect this department or this division? So as a fiscal manager, as I came out of that class, I started thinking, instead of like an accountant, which I was already pretty burnt out of, I started thinking of different ways to express numbers, of how to get people to understand them the way I understood them, how to make budgets make more sense, and just different ways of moving things around. And while I was doing that, I wasn't just doing the numbers. I would come up with ideas and, like they say, test them out. I would test them out on paper, and then I would go to my bosses and say, hey, maybe if we try this. And the whole time I kept giving these different ideas and things, and they were just watching me. And then one day the deputy director went to another position, which was, and I was at Parks and Recreation at the time. And they came to me and they said, hey, we think you should step in as the deputy director. And I thought, no, I'm an accountant. I'm a fiscal manager. I do numbers. But what I didn't realize was after the class, so many of the things I was doing was really taking the blinders off of my own mentality of, this is what I went to school for. This is what I'm going to do. The numbers are this. And I started saying, you know what? And they said, no, you do all these other things. And they started asking me to do other things throughout this time. And I just kept developing, but it was all because I just thought different. I thought way different than I did before. When I got out of college, I was told, you have a degree in accounting. You're going to be an accountant. If you stay in public accounting, you become a CPA, you become a manager, you become a partner. When I came to the city, it was like the normal city grind. We processed the numbers. And this just started having me think of different ways to solve any problem that was available within the department, no matter how small it was. And like they say, a lot of them were small problems, the low-hanging fruit, which, you pick enough low-hanging fruit and you have a full basket, and that makes a big difference. And so from that aspect, I became the deputy director, and it kind of set me on a different path to where I stopped seeing myself as just a number cruncher or an accountant. Just solve problems. And that's what ends up happening is you start looking at everything that you do, and it's a small problem, a big problem, but there's a way to solve it. And then I was the deputy director for about 2 years. And then they came to me and said, would you like to be the director of solid waste? And I thought, well, that's a big jump. But I never saw myself in this role prior to taking the class. If you would have, before I took the class, my goal was to move up in the accounting department and maybe someday be the budget officer or a CFO. And now it's taken me to all these other places where you really do learn to just begin to solve problems and engage people and listen to people, not having to always have the answer, but always being able to know where to go to get the answer, and to engage other people to come and help and come and share your thoughts with me, you know. And that's kind of been one of the big things as a director and as a deputy director. They expect you to have all the answers, but when you go to them and you say, hey, what do you think? You know, I have some supervisors now that I'm getting ready to try something, and I handed it over to them, and both of them have gone through the Entrepreneurial Mindset class, because I try and send as many of my drivers, my supervisors, and no matter what level you are, I try and send them through this class because I want them to know that they can think too. And I'll hand them things and I'll say, hey, what do you think about this? Go shoot holes in it and come back and let's talk. And it's really a mind shift change to where you're starting to empower a workforce to start to get them thinking, opposed to, I've been driving a trash truck for 8 years. Well, maybe that's great and that's awesome, and I love that. My dad drove a truck for 25 years, but empowering them, now they start seeing, well, you know what, I can do something else. Just like that day when I said, you know what, I'm more than just an accountant. I can do other things. I can think outside the box. I can present things in different ways. And it really has taken me on a pretty interesting career journey, as far as since I went to the class, as opposed to just, it's opened doors in the city, it's opened doors with my employees, but at the end of the day, it really did open up a totally different career path for me than what I thought it would be before I took the class.
Hey, Matt, that's fabulous. Can you just tell me, like, why, can you get to the why of that? I mean, that seems like you said you came into it, you were burnt out.
Yeah.
City, like, what, can you dig in a little deeper to like what changed?
Well, you know, you just get burnt out doing the same thing over. You know, in public accounting, you do the same thing. You're auditing a business. They may have different, you go in with your audit programs and you look at their balance sheet and the income statement and you identify the problems and then you just report it to the client and then you walk away, you know, and you tell them, here's where you have issues, here's where you have problems. And then when I transferred over to accounting, it was the same thing. You know, we all worked towards one thing, and that was the CAFR, our year-end financial statements, you know, and you just identify where numbers are wrong and you put them back in the right place. But, you know, after the class, you start to see, well, you see where the problem is. Why don't you change it? Or why don't you try and give examples of how it can be changed? Right. You've identified the problem. You know where it is. You probably understand it better than most. You may not have the answer, but at least bring it up and let's start thinking about how to fix the problem. So when I would present, when I got to Parks and Rec as the fiscal manager after I took the class, I wouldn't just present a budget. I would say, look, we should probably move this money over here because it'll solve these 2 or 3 different issues in another department, and it won't cause any issues in this department. And they would look at it and say, wow, instead of just going to them and saying, hey, here's the budget, you may need to move some money. You figure it out. You know?
Yeah. Yep. So, okay. Thank you for that, Matthew. There's a question here to Haley or Tom. All right. So from Mike Baldwin, question for Haley or Tom. First, love the eLife movement and concept, right on. Want to implement in our workforce. You mentioned that many employees already have the solution. The answer, know what the problem is. What is the difference from being innovative and from actually doing your job, which most likely includes solving problems within your functional area? Often it is assumed or mandated that employees are empowered to solve issues, in quotes, and is inherent to the job and why we pay them. So, are we actually trying to motivate people to do their jobs rather than go above and beyond and being creative? Isn't initiative implied in their leadership role?
That's a great question. And I was looking at that a second ago. So here's part of the philosophy and the mentality that we're trying to communicate. Solving problems is the job. And it doesn't matter what the position is. A solid waste driver, somebody who's an accountant, somebody who's a salesperson. We have problems to solve. Now, the organization function, the function of the organization itself, in a lot of organizations, we will delegate problem solving for the organization to the supervisors. And I can't tell you how many times we've had an employee that will go tell a supervisor, hey, we have a problem, here's an idea. Supervisor will tell them no. And of course, the reason why they tell them no is because the supervisor already has too many things to do. And if the employee was able to be engaged at that level, some of these problems would get solved sometimes without the supervisor even being involved. Now, this is part of a huge culture shift, because solving problems really is, it is the work. It is part of the job. Going above and beyond, that's another piece to that. And there's a perception that, well, if I take the Icehouse class, my employees, they start getting on teams, or they start working on problems, then they're going above and beyond their jobs. That might seem like an obvious perspective. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build a culture where if someone bumps into an obstacle, then we work on that obstacle right now, and it becomes part of our regular job. How we recognize employees for going above and beyond is one thing, but we're trying to change the mentality of the employee that comes to work every day from well, I think I'm going to go above and beyond today than just do my job, to I want to perform. I don't want to be one of the 60% or the 50% that is disengaged. I want to be actively engaged, and we want our employees actively engaged. Supervisors will have more time to do their jobs. Employees will have more excitement about doing their jobs, and problems will get solved. I'll give you an example. You know, you pull into the parking lot, you're coming into work, and there's trash in the parking lot of your sales establishment. You know, whose responsibility is it to pick up that trash? Well, that's not my job, right? That's the old mindset, the old economy mindset. Someone else is getting paid to do that. Whereas if I take pride in my company, and I like the way, and I see the trash, I pick it up and I put it in the wastebasket. So simple. It becomes part of what I'm already doing. And then performance, we want performance to become, I mean, honestly, when we do performance evaluations here at the city, and this is why these perceptions are out there, when someone says, hey, what do you think of a city employee? And the first word they come up with is lazy or taxpayer wasting. I mean, all this. We're on the news every night. Your city government's on the news every night too. There's a reason for that, because of this perception that, well, this is my job. Well, we have a motto here. It's called One Albuquerque. And we've had this We Are One City motto for a while. And this idea of being one Albuquerque, or being one city, or one organization, or one Staples, or one Office Depot, or one train is, yes, I have my job. Matt has his job. Everybody in each of our departments has our own jobs, but we are all one in this company. And it's all about solving the problem. Number one, we have 1,000 problems to solve for our customers, which are the citizens. If we're in a sales company, we have 1,000 problems to solve for our customers. That's why they buy our products, because we solve a problem. That's what entrepreneurship is about. We have internal problems that need to be solved by somebody. Our employees have the best ideas. We wanted to be, it's a long-winded answer to your question. We want our employees to develop this cultural mindset of solving problems as part of what they do while they're here. And it's happening. It's just like Matthew said. I mean, it's not like he drank some special Kool-Aid, although this course is kind of like Kool-Aid, right? Yeah. He just woke up and suddenly decided that he wanted to start taking on responsibility for things that weren't his responsibility, because he was inspired and felt and realized that he had the power to choose how he was going to approach and look at his job. And we see this with participant after participant after participant. We've got solid waste drivers, trash truck drivers that decided to work on a problem with dispatch radio. They had radio issues in our Clean Cities program. these guys, they sat down in this project, they came up with a solution where they were going to teach a class to all the other drivers about radio etiquette, on how to use the radio so that they would have open air time. And what it led to was another recommendation, which was a problem that was solved as a result of solving the first problem, about finding ways to better manage check-ins so that these guys wouldn't have to be reporting on the radio every 5 minutes throughout the day where they were. We have GPS in the trucks. We have all this stuff going on. And all those solutions came from these low-paid employees in the organization. And they were excited that they were going to be able to fix this pain point that they had. And they took responsibility for doing the training for it. I mean,
that's what I was saying earlier, Tom. Like, people need to be engaged in matters.
Right.
I mean, this is sort of the source of intrinsic motivation. We need autonomy. We need to feel like that we're competent. We need to feel like our work is mattering, as being
right.
recognized. And that's really what brings people to life. It's not, it's not really rocket science. And Haley, I wondered if you had any response to this question.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first heard it, I started to think like, God, maybe it's just our government, like a government problem. But as I think about it, I don't think it is. I used to work for a big consumer products company, and I felt like, I could have been doing my job and just done my job, or I could really bring it. And there is a difference. I think I still could have been a fine employee and done my job, or I can go above and beyond. And it is really a culture thing. I think about, those examples of, Southwest Airlines employees, gate agents taking care of someone's dog because they can't take it on the plane, or so, just like these examples of employees really being enabled to do something more. And so I don't think it is just a government employee problem. I know we do have very strict rules and regulations and union contracts and things that can sometimes feel kind of limiting, but often I think employees I think get beat down if you're told no enough, or if your idea is shut down enough. I mean, yeah, then you are sort of doing the baseline, but it's because it's exhausting to feel that sort of rejection. And so sometimes I think it might be like the case with Matthew, that maybe you need to get woken up again by being empowered to do something.
Just a real quick thing. Were you done, Haley? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, so, as Tom was saying earlier about the trash, walking by, picking it up. I mean, just today, I met with two separate, one supervisor and one of my purchasing people who've gone through the class. And we order 17 trucks a year. That's part of our replacement policy. We have a replacement schedule. And we'd already gotten ready to place our order. And right before we get ready to place the order tomorrow, my purchaser comes to me because he knows he can do this, because he knows I'm open to at least listening. And he says, look, this is the schedule we've had for 8 years. He says, but I've gone out in the yard and I've got with the supervisor of the trucks, and we don't need these 3 trucks. He said, but eventually we're going to need, he said, we're going to need these 3 other trucks. He said, now if we just buy like we're supposed to be on our schedule, he said, we'll probably end up having 3 trucks sitting around next year when we're going to be short in another division on a different style of truck. And I just looked at him and he said, I've already talked to the supervisor. He said, and I've looked at our replacement schedule. I've looked at our maintenance. He said, so because these trucks, you have to order them a year out. It's not like you can just go to Don Chalmers and buy them. So you order the truck and they come in 1 year. So he looked a year ahead and said, we don't need 3 of these trucks in this division. We need them over here because that's our busier division and the trucks get wore out quicker. And I looked at it and looked at his paperwork, and in 10 minutes I made a decision, said, yep, change the order because it's due tomorrow. Let's go with what you got. Another guy came to me and said, hey, I noticed something a year ago. And I said, okay. He said, we keep ordering a certain type of can because they get broken. So what he did was it sent him on this thing to start asking the question, why do we order this can? And it came out to be 3 answers. Number 1, either our drivers aren't trained properly and they're breaking the can. Number 2, we need to put a hoist on a truck to help load the can. Or number 3, they're just put in wrong positions, which is causing the truck to bang them in certain areas that break them. He said, and he looked over the last 5 years and said, we spend a significant amount of money on this. He says, if I can just run 2 test pilots to see if we need a hoist, it'll cost us $2,000. If that's not the problem, then we know it's probably our drivers and we'll have to retrain them. Or it could be location. And I looked at him and I said, run with it. You know, it's going to cost me $2,000 to probably save $80,000 to $100,000 every 2 years once this problem is solved. And I don't think that happens if these guys don't go to a class where they feel like they can come and even research something like this. They would have just stayed with the regular replacement schedule. We buy 17 trucks like this every year. They wouldn't have gone back and reevaluated it. And the can thing, most of the times they probably would have just kept ordering the same cans every year, and more break, order more. Yeah. You know, and I think that's what it kind of gets you in that mentality. You get really invested in your department, in your job, and it becomes the culture. Like, this is who we are. You know, yes, we're city employees, but we're solid waste. I tell my guys all the time, even though we're city employees, I want us to be the best solid waste company in the United States, even though we're the city.
Yeah. That's so cool. Matt, one of the things that I love about what you're saying is, you know, the guy comes to you like not only with a potential solution, but a researched solution.
Right. But which is what they're taught to do in this class. I mean, they're taught, right.
That's the point, because people say, well, like, oh, I gave my boss an idea, she or he didn't listen to me. It's like, that's just a lame excuse. It's like when you come to somebody, you've got a problem and a solution that's been sought out, it's been vetted. It's like, I don't have words to say that. It's just such an amazing two examples.
To be honest, from a management standpoint, that helps me, because now that's an answer I don't have to go dig out, or it's something that I don't have to put on my list to do, you know, because they come to me and I'm like, okay, now I know I got one more problem on my to-do list that needs to be prioritized, that I need to either go find somebody to fix it, and even if they hadn't fixed the problem yet, I would have empowered them to say, hey, get a couple supervisors and research it a little bit more. I've done that in the past where they'll come to me and I'm not 100% sold, and I'll say, go back and look at these things and then come back to me in a couple of weeks. But even as far as the city goes, I mean, as far as the administration, they tell us the same thing. You know, don't just bring us a problem. Come with 2 or 3 solutions, because, you know, we're the ones that are out there. We're the ones that are in the field. We're the ones that are seeing it. And like Haley said, I mean, God, you can't be more spot on. A lot of times the answers are already there. The solutions are already there. It's just getting them out and getting them open.
But it's another piece of the puzzle here that's important. Is the solutions that are presented are being acknowledged. I'm sure you're not, you know, telling anybody that comes to you with an idea, go do it.
No.
But, you know, people who will put the effort in, their efforts are being taken seriously. And that's how, like Coach, you're saying, Tom, I've heard you say this before. What you say is like lots of people solving little problems adds up to culture change.
Yes.
Matt, you kind of put it out there as low-hanging fruit, but you can gather a lot of fruit that way. I just kind of love that approach. Goes back to what you said, Haley. It's not about, you know, going out and solving the big problems. Just like start solving the small problems that are right in front of you right now. And it's that problem solving, like the shift that occurs in the individual to start looking around instead of heads down, focusing on what I'm told to do. You know, just fill out the order form and buy the trucks. You look around and look at the bigger picture and say, like, why are we doing this? Maybe this can be done another way. I mean, that's huge.
And, you know, and this is the case in some organizations, private organizations, but definitely in the public sector, like city government. A lot of people worry about who's going to get the credit for my idea. And one of the things that we talk a lot about with our employees, an entrepreneur who's trying to build a successful company doesn't worry about whether or not he's going to be recognized for his amazing product, as opposed to understanding that his bottom line is feeding his family, making a profit, and having a business that's going to last for 20 years. Getting credit is icing on the cake. That's a mentality that successful entrepreneurs have. They understand. We actually have this conversation with our employees to help them understand. It's like, you know, part of this, you know, we're part of this organization, and there are ways to keep your ideas from getting stolen, but we're all working together in this organization. And it's more important that the outcome, saving money, improving efficiency, When solid waste saves money like that, and then another department, another division gets what they need and they get it today, they don't have to wait 2 years to get it. Then there's more budget money available that ends up providing for travel or providing for, the next salary increase or whatever, depending on what the structure is for the company, is we learn how to work towards outcomes versus credit. When you work for the government, the only person that gets credit for your idea here at the city or in the state is the governor or the mayor. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? But we know in our departments, when we solve a problem, we make our lives easier. We make everybody's lives easier, because the role of an entrepreneur is to help people. The role of an entrepreneurial employee is to solve problems for our customers. And then when that happens, it's amazing how the ego starts to kind of take a back seat. And we've got people in some departments that are competing with each other to solve problems. It's funny. It's like, even, we'll pick on Matt's guys right now because he's on the call, but it's like we got a couple supervisors over there that have been through the program that are literally competing with each other to see how many problems they can solve every year. Yeah. And then trying to, letting us know. It's just funny. I mean, people choosing on their own to work more productively without being told by their supervisor to do it. God, it's magic, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. Tom, we've got another follow-up question from Mike in Fort Worth. He's saying, add-on question, has ABQ done any employee engagement surveys lately?
I'm glad you asked.
I'm Icehouse certified Fort Worth 2018. I'm all in.
So my desire and priority has been that we would do Gallup's employee engagement survey process, and I want to do before and after. Obviously, it's a budget-related issue that we've got to do. We've got 6,000 employees, and so, I think they're like $25 or $30 a pop, and my preference is we do one at the beginning of the course and then one not directly after the course, but within a month or two once they've gone back to their department. So we're working on that to be able to do that. We are starting to see changes. One of the things I did not expect to see, because my frustration comes with the fact that I've been here at the city for 3 years now, since 2016 when I came on board, and I say I only have 600 people through the program. But what's happening with this program is we have people in every department that have gone through the program, all 22 different divisions. And what's happening is people that have gone through the program are evangelizing for us in their departments with people who haven't gone through the program. And we have some people in other departments that are behaving like they've been through the program because they're learning it from people that have. So we didn't expect that to happen. And we're glad that it's happening because it's proving the point. But to answer your question specifically, our intention is to use Gallup's employee engagement survey to be able to have something that's statistically significant to back up and document.
Good. Well, thank you, Tom. So any questions now? We're just about out of time here. If you have any questions, you can post them in the chat function on the Zoom window. You can also post them in the Q&A. I think Nick can get the questions there. So if you have any final questions, happy to answer them while we still have Tom and Matthew and Haley on the call. So as a follow-up from this webinar, we'll send you some links and the slides immediately following up. You'll have Tom's contact information there as well. Tom, I'm going to take the screen back if there's Tom's contact there, and I'll make sure you guys all have this contact information. It's jdarling@cabq.gov. We will send you that very shortly. Now, let me see if I can make this work. All right, how do I?
Let me stop sharing mine.
Yeah, I think that's what we need you to do. We don't have any open questions at the moment.
There you go.
So I'm going to put, my slide back up there, Tom?
Not yet.
Okay, I got to share my screen. There we go. Okay, why isn't it sharing? There we go. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So I want to make sure I'm not losing the chat function here. I'm going to pull that back up. Any final questions here before we wrap up? While I'm waiting for any of you that might have some final questions, I just want to remind you that if you want to become certified to teach this program, our next public facilitator training is in Houston, Texas, February 12th through 14th at Houston Community College. Tricia, thank you. Were there any concerns or resistance without showing the full videos? For example, the thought that employees might leave and start businesses. That's from Tricia.
That's a great question, Tricia, because we've had a few people ask that question. I don't show all the videos in the class. If they do the online portion, they're going to get a few more. But you know, we're not focusing on helping them start a business. It's funny. We've got several city employees that have side businesses that have come through, but we've picked out specific videos that relate specifically to each one of the units that we're teaching, that tell the story that we want to tell. Because what we're doing when we're having the group time within each of the lessons is really focusing them on workplace related problems. So we've had a couple employees that have been through that have a business that we're really excited about applying it to the business. But most everybody that's taken the course has had no problem seeing the connection with how to apply it to their work. Yeah. So
I get that question a lot, Tricia. And you know, basically what we see is you know, very, very rarely does that happen. Mm-hmm. And you know, my answer to the question, I've been asked that by, you know, executives and founders and business owners, and they're saying like, well, what happens if they don't take this course and they stay? I mean, how do you reconcile that? If 1 in 100 winds up leaving and starting a business, did you lose a great employee? You know, probably not in my view. So, but it's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Latasha saying, thank you, great webinar. Latasha, thanks for being here. So I just want to wrap up here to let you know that today is the first day we're making the Icehouse Entrepreneurial Mindset program available to the general public. So it's been taught in colleges, universities, high schools, nonprofits all over the world. Today is the first day that it's now available to the general public. You can go to our website, you can enroll in the program, you can take it as a self-paced course. So that's brand spanking new today. If you want to, and all this will be sent in an email follow-up, as Tom mentioned earlier, if you want Tom to facilitate an online delivery of the Icehouse program, you can also arrange to do that. We'll send you, you'll have Tom's contact information in the follow-up email. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to sign off. Again, Tom, thank you for your time, and Haley and Matthew as well. I really appreciate all of you spending some time with us today to talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. If you want to learn more about this program, we'll send a detailed follow-up email, including the slides here. So again, thank you. Mike Baldwin is saying, nice job, Tom. Thank you. We'll reach out. Excellent.
yes, please do. Please do.
Yes, yes, yes. So thank you all for joining the webinar, and we're going to sign off for now.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Haley. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.